The iron key was found in a patch of kudzu behind the crumbling caretaker's shed. An inch of rust, a twisted loop, and the faint outline of a number carved by a trembling hand. 47. The groundskeeper who unearthed it said it didn't feel like metal at all, that when he touched it, it felt warm, as if some feverish residue still clung to it after a century underground. He didn't know that the same number appeared in a long-buried manifest recovered from the Savannah Medical College, a document listing the subjects used in a series of clandestine experiments. Most were monkeys imported through the Carolinas, but a handful, 5 in total, were listed only by age and skin color. 4 of those entries were crossed out in a hurried scrawl. 1 was circled. When archivists opened the old ledger, their fingers left streaks of oil on the fragile paper. The ink had bled into the parchment in odd places, as though the words themselves resisted being read. The final page, charred at the edges, ended with a note from an unidentified assistant. "Do not touch the girl. He says she speaks in the dark now." Nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew what spoke. But everyone who has handled the ledger agrees that something about the air changes when the last page turns. A heaviness settles. A faint, unplaceable scent, like copper and damp straw, creeps in from nowhere. For decades, these objects lay forgotten between cracked walls and mildew-coated trunks. Yet all of them point toward the same man, a once celebrated Southern physician whose name nearly vanished from medical history. His research promised to remake the country's scientific future. Instead, it left behind whispers of vanished bodies, strange lights from the anatomy building at night, and screams that the groundskeepers swore came from cages no one could find by daylight. Before we continue with the story of Dr. Aldric Turner and the horrors hidden in his forgotten laboratory, join our community of mystery lovers. Hit subscribe and tell us in the comments which state you're listening from. Your support helps us uncover more forgotten stories like this one. The year was 1838, and America breathed with the uneasy rhythm of a country racing toward modernity while dragging the weight of its own sins. In the port towns of Georgia, where Spanish moss hung from oaks like funereal drapery, steamships pressed along the riverbanks, and horse carts rattled past storefronts advertising tinctures, elixirs, patent medicines. The air smelled of salt water, coal soot, and the sour yeast of yesterday's bread. Savannah still bore the architecture of a genteel world. Iron-worked balconies, gas lamps that flickered in the thick night air, but beneath its charm pulsed something raw and unsettled. The city was a crossroads of wealth and bondage, knowledge and brutality. Medical colleges were rising across the South, eager to prove they could rival the institutions of Boston and Philadelphia. Professors lectured beneath high-arched ceilings, while outside, enslaved men stacked firewood and polished brass instruments they were forbidden to touch. The pursuit of science, so noble in public speeches, often hid its darkest work behind locked doors and windows that never opened. Church bells tolled each morning from St. John's steeple, calling the congregation to prayer. Women in pale muslin dresses guided children along cobblestone walks. Market vendors shouted the day's prices in clipped, impatient voices. Corn cakes, pears, fresh perch from the river. Yet every person in this city lived with the unspoken knowledge that there were places one did not wander after sunset. Warehouses that pulsed with too much candlelight. Alleyways that echoed with strange, metallic clinks. Carriages that arrived at the medical college under moonless skies. In the countryside beyond the city, acres of rice swaying in the humid breeze, there were rumors told softly between enslaved families. Some said the white physician sometimes came at night, that they didn't always bring back the ones they took. Others believed the swamp spirits dragged people away, that the marsh swallowed the unlucky whole. But the stories only reached the city in fragments, carried in whispers from one kitchen to another, and those with the power to investigate chose not to listen. America, in this decade, held a complicated fascination with what it called natural philosophy, a mixture of biology, anatomy, and spiritual inquiry. People wanted to understand life itself, its boundaries, its origins, its hidden machinery. Scientists asked bold questions. Could instinct be removed? Could obedience be taught by altering the brain? Could a creature be made docile or enraged through the right manipulation? Could the mind retain memory separate from the body? Some experiments stayed in books, theoretical and harmless. Others crossed lines no one dared discuss publicly. A medical college in a wealthy port city had resources. Cadavers obtained without consent, imported animals, tools forged by local blacksmiths, and a steady flow of funds from plantation families who believed science might someday justify their way of life. They wanted physicians who could claim that hierarchy, of race, of intellect, of worth, was rooted in biology itself. And some doctors, ambitious and hungry for prestige, were willing to give them the answers they craved. In those years, Savannah's streets were alive with contradictions. A traveling preacher cried warnings of hellfire at the same corner where a newspaper boy shouted about marvels of modern surgery. A recently arrived lecturer claimed electricity could heal melancholy. Another insisted that animal behavior held the secret to human morality. Curious crowds filled lecture halls to watch demonstrations. Dissected frog legs twitching under electrical current, sedated monkeys undergoing procedures the audience did not fully understand, skulls displayed beside chalk diagrams of temperament and character. But behind every demonstration were shadows. Assistants carrying buckets they never spoke of, stains scrubbed from the floorboards with vinegar and lye, and one operating room where the windows had been boarded shut under the claim that sunlight interferes with the instruments. Hey, the enslaved population walked through this world with eyes sharpened by survival. They heard things others ignored. They saw carriages without drivers, wheels coated in dried mud that smelled not of earth, but of the cadaver rooms. They recognized when someone went missing, even if the city pretended not to. Their knowledge formed a second map of Savannah, one layered beneath the official one, a map drawn in instinct, silence, and fear. On Sunday evenings, families gathered in dim cabins lit by tallow candles, whispering news in Gula or soft English. They spoke of children who woke screaming from dreams of cages. They spoke of night birds that circled the river whenever the medical college chimney smoked after dusk. They spoke of a girl whose shadow, some claimed, did not match her body, but always, their voices grew quieter when the adults realized the little ones were listening. Yet the city's wealthy families told stories of progress. They bragged about their physicians' boldness, their willingness to push boundaries. They raised toasts in parlors lined with mahogany furniture. Savannah shall produce the next great scientific pioneer, they declared, a man who will place us on the map of history. It was in this charged atmosphere that Dr. Aldric Turner arrived, a brilliant, intense physician from Virginia, whose early writings earned praise from scholars in Europe. He was lauded for his work with primates, his theories on instinct and obedience, his claim that the boundary between man and beast is narrower than philosophers admit. Colleges courted him, wealthy patrons funded him, newspapers printed his lectures in bold type. But behind closed doors, some colleagues whispered that Turner's eyes carried a strange fervor when he spoke of consciousness, that he questioned not just what life was, but what it could be forced to become, that he believed fear and memory could be measured, extracted, manipulated. And there were rumors, only faint then, that a few subjects in his earlier research had not been animals at all. By the time Turner accepted his position at the Savannah Medical College, the city believed it had secured a visionary. They built him a new laboratory wing. They gave him 3 assistants. They promised him privacy. They did not ask what he meant when he requested a basement room with no windows. The room was built anyway, and the experiments began. Even now, when historians speak of that period, they do so carefully. Because once you start examining the details, once you follow the ledgers, the testimonies, the rumors whispered by those whose families survived the plantations, a pattern emerges, a dark network stretching from the rice fields to the anatomy theaters, from locked journals to mass graves without names. A network that begins with missing monkeys and ends with missing people. They said Dr. Aldric Turner walked like a man listening to footsteps that no one else could hear. He arrived in Savannah with only 2 trunks, one filled with medical instruments wrapped in linen, the other locked, its contents unknown. Residents recalled the first morning he stepped off the riverboat, tall, pale, impeccably dressed, his black coat dusted with river mist. His posture was unnervingly straight, his gaze unblinking. The dock workers later remarked that he did not seem to breathe like other men. His breaths came slow, as though he were rationing the air itself. Those who met him described his voice as soft and cold, a voice that made listeners lean closer without quite realizing why. Turner had a way of speaking in carefully measured sentences, each word chosen with a surgical precision, as if any excess would clutter his thoughts. Yet when he lectured about the nature of instinct or the architecture of the brain, there was something fevered behind his calmness, something that made even seasoned physicians shift in their seats. One afternoon, only weeks after his arrival, a junior doctor named Samuel Worth approached Turner outside the anatomy hall. Worth, nervous but eager to impress, offered to help prepare specimens for an upcoming lecture. Turner's eyes swept over him as though assessing the worth of the man's bones. "You have a steady hand," Turner said quietly. "But a steady hand is useless without a steady conscience. Can you stomach the truth of what lies beneath a creature's fear?" Worth hesitated. I believe so, sir." Turner stepped closer, his shadow crossing Worth's shoes. "Belief is cheap. Discovery is costly. Remember that." From that day on, no one ever saw Samuel Worth volunteer again. Despite his unsettling aura, the city's elite adored Turner. He dined in their parlors, lectured at their universities, and wrote editorials praising the promise of Southern science. Yet there were hints of something hollow behind his charm. Moments when he stared too long at a child in the street, or when he asked the grocer whether monkeys responded differently to hunger when separated from their families. That question alone caused the grocer to cross himself. But Turner was only one piece of the story. The second belonged to a girl named Mariah. Mariah was 14, slender as a reed, with dark eyes that seemed older than her small frame suggested. Born into bondage on a rice plantation west of the city, she moved with the quiet grace of someone who had learned to survive by being unnoticed. Her mother, Ruth, often said Mariah was born listening. The girl could detect danger before any adult sensed it, an approaching overseer, a storm rolling in from the marshes, the shifting moods of men who held too much power. Mariah worked in the main house, cleaning the windows at dawn and the floors at night. Some evenings, she hummed old spirituals under her breath while polishing the silverware, her voice so soft it barely disturbed the air. Other servants found her melodies comforting, but the mistress of the house, a stern woman named Mrs. Radcliffe, complained the songs made the hallways feel haunted. Mariah tried to keep out of notice, but the world had a cruel habit of noticing girls like her. One morning, while scrubbing the kitchen doorway, she overheard 2 plantation men speaking in low whispers by the well. One asked, "Is the doctor coming tonight?" The other spat into the dirt and muttered, "Let's hope he takes one of the boys this time." Mariah froze, her rag dripping water onto the floorboards. The men hadn't said the doctor's name. They didn't have to. That night, Mariah told her mother what she'd heard. Ruth set down her sewing, the thread trembling in her fingers. "You stay close to me these days," she whispered. "Times are turning strange. The fields talk at night, and the river, it don't like what they doing in the city." Mariah nodded, but she didn't sleep at all that night. She lay listening to the wind scrape against the shutters, every sound amplified by the darkness. The third key figure emerged from the opposite end of Savannah's society, a journalist named Elias Hardin. At 29, he was a wiry man with sharp cheekbones, a perpetual ink stain on his left cuff, and a reputation for asking inconvenient questions. His newspaper, the Savannah Evening Chronicle, hired him to write about commerce and shipping, but Hardin cared little for cargo prices or shipping delays. He lingered instead on the oddities of the city, the missing persons no one investigated, the sudden rise of anonymous medical supplies arriving at the docks, the wealthy families who insisted their parties end before the sun went down. One night, while drinking bitter coffee in his office, Hardin heard a knock at the door. A young boy, barefoot and breathless, stood in the doorway. "You Elias Hardin?" the boy asked, voice trembling. "I am," Hardin said. "What's wrong? Someone send you?" The boy shook his head. "Ain't nobody send me, sir. But they say you write things folks don't like written." Hardin set down his pen. "Sometimes." The boy swallowed hard. "There's a girl missing. From the big house. They say she ran, but she didn't. My daddy saw a carriage leave last night. No driver, just a man sitting in the back, black coat, tall." Hardin felt a cold prickle at the base of his neck. "What was the girl's name?" "Mariah," the boy whispered. "They won't say nothing else about it, but I think they took her to the doctor's school, the one with the boarded windows." Hardin stood up so abruptly that the chair legs screeched against the floor. "Who told you that?" The boy stepped back, frightened. "Nobody. Just things I heard. Folks say the monkeys ain't the only ones screaming in there." Those words stayed with Hardin long after the boy ran down the dark street and vanished behind the old brick warehouses. He had read about Dr. Turner, of course. Everyone had. The man was a rising star, praised in northern journals, rumored to be conducting revolutionary studies. But Hardin had always sensed something off in the way Turner avoided speaking about his methods. The doctor's published work mentioned subjects without specifying species. His diagrams blurred human silhouettes into animal ones, as though the distinction itself was a trivial inconvenience. Hardin began asking questions around the city, softly at first. A shopkeeper claimed Turner bought strange quantities of laudanum. A blacksmith admitted he'd been paid handsomely to forge restraints, with hinges too fine for a grown man's strength. An oysterman said he'd delivered crates to the college late at night and heard what sounded like metal scraping over stone, followed by a low, guttural moan. But the most chilling testimony came from a woman named Hester, an elderly midwife who'd tended births across Savannah for decades. She sat hunched in a wooden rocker, her hands gnarled with age, when Hardin visited her home. "You ought not dig into that man's business," she warned him, staring at the fire. "Some knowledge don't want to be found." "What do you know of him?" Hardin asked. Hester's lips tightened. "I know I lost 3 babies last year, all from the same plantation, all gone before morning. Their mothers swore they saw men carrying bundles toward the river, bundles that cried." Hardin tried to swallow, but his throat felt dry. "Are you suggesting—" "I ain't suggesting nothing," Hester interrupted. "I'm telling you what I heard. The city ain't safe for the powerless right now. Not with Turner here. He talks of souls like they pieces of cloth a man can tear apart and stitch back. Into none." Outside, a storm rolled across the marshes, thunder cracking like distant artillery. But Turner, Mariah, and Hardin were not the only ones entangled in this shadowed web. The plantations surrounding Savannah were run by families whose wealth insulated them from scrutiny. Men like Charles Radcliffe, Mariah's enslaver, walked through society like kings. Radcliffe was a large man, his face broad and ruddy from years of sun. He dressed in immaculate suits and carried silver-handled canes, the kind that declared both refinement and threat. To the public, he was a philanthropist who donated to hospitals and funded scientific lectures. But to those who lived under his rule, he was a man of unpredictable temper, one who believed obedience could be beaten into the bones of a child. Radcliffe admired Turner in a way that bordered on worship. He once told guests at a dinner party, "That man will change the way God himself understands creation." When Turner visited the plantation to request subjects for observation, always under vague terms, Radcliffe did not hesitate. He believed Turner could produce evidence that intelligence, morality, and submission were biologically ordained, and evidence, in Radcliffe's mind, justified everything. One evening, after sharing brandy in the study, Radcliffe leaned close to Turner and murmured, "If your research succeeds, Doctor, the world will owe you an explanation, not the other way around." Turner's lips curved into a faint, unreadable smile. "The world seldom owes the truth, Mr. Radcliffe. Only results." Radcliffe laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Spoken like a man who understands power." And somewhere in the hallway just outside the study, Mariah stood perfectly still, holding an empty tray, listening to the sound of their voices through the crack in the door. The final figure in this unfolding storm was Brother Thaddeus, a preacher from the outskirts of the city. He was a thin, weathered man whose sermons often drifted into warnings of unnatural sin. His congregation, composed mostly of freed black families and poor laborers, believed he could sense when something wicked walked the land. Thaddeus spoke of spirits unsettled, of restless dead wandering the marsh, of nights when the boundary between flesh and soul grew thin. He first entered the story when several enslaved families sought him privately, begging for prayer. Their children woke shrieking, claiming to see the thin man with the metal hands. Livestock refused to graze near the old carriage path leading toward the medical college. Some nights, the swamp itself glowed faintly, a sickly blue light rippling across the water. Thaddeus visited the area one dawn, his boots sinking into cold mud. When the wind shifted, he caught a metallic scent, iron and smoke. He stared toward the city and whispered, "Something unholy is being built there." A week later, Elias Hardin knocked on his chapel door. "I hear you've been listening to the fears of the people," Hardin said. Thaddeus studied him a moment. "Fear is the language of the oppressed. It teaches before the truth arrives." "Then help me find the truth," Hardin replied. Thaddeus exhaled slowly, the breath trembling in the cool morning air. "Be careful what you uncover, son. Sometimes the truth ain't meant for the living." In the days that followed, their paths, all five of them, began to curve toward one another. Dr. Aldric Turner, with his locked trunk and forbidden studies. Mariah, whose quiet instincts sensed dangers others ignored. Elias Hardin, hunting the ragged edges of the city's secrets. Charles Radcliffe, whose ambition fed the experiments he pretended not to understand. And Brother Thaddeus, who listened to the trembling earth and knew something old and cruel was stirring. Their stories would soon collide in a way that would shake Savannah to its core. The first signs came quietly, slipping into Savannah like a sickness without a fever. No one noticed at first, not the merchants polishing their display windows, not the clergymen arranging sermons, not the students rushing between lectures, but those who lived closest to the edges of the city, where the forest crept in and the roads thinned into dirt tracks, began to sense something was wrong. It started with sound. Just after dusk, when the last light drained from the sky, residents near the medical college swore they heard shrill, frantic cries, too sharp for a bird, too desperate for a dog. Some claimed the voices echoed like children wailing. Others insisted they were animals, but no one could explain why the screams rose at the same hour every night, nor why they ended so abruptly, as if cut off mid-breath. One evening, a group of college boys passing by the laboratory paused when they heard the faint tapping of metal on stone. One boy, Edmund Blake, pressed his ear to the boarded window. What he heard sent him stumbling backward. It had sounded like words, he whispered to his friends, his face drained of color. Like someone was trying to speak, but couldn't. The others laughed nervously, but none of them dared approach the building again. Inside the plantations, stranger things unfolded. Mariah noticed the animals first. The mules refused to approach the well after sundown, their hooves scraping the earth as they backed away, snorting in agitation. The dogs that once followed the field hands now cowered beneath porches whenever a carriage passed along the north road toward Savannah. Even the insects, normally a ceaseless chorus, fell eerily silent on certain nights. One dawn, while drawing water before the household woke, Mariah found dark streaks along the inside of the well's stone wall. At first, she thought it was mud, but when she touched it, the substance left a copper-colored smear on her fingers. She sniffed it and pulled her hand back instantly. Blood. Old blood, dried by the night air. She scrubbed her hands raw before anyone could notice. That same week, 2 enslaved boys vanished from a neighboring plantation. Their disappearance was blamed on escape attempts, but no search parties were sent, not even half-hearted ones. The adults in the quarters whispered at night, fear clinging to their voices like damp air. They didn't run, one woman muttered. Rivers don't swallow 2 boys at once. Then what? Another asked. A third voice spoke, low and trembling. The doctor took them. Mariah sat close to her mother, listening as Ruth clasped her hands so tightly it hurt. In Savannah proper, Elias Hardin followed threads no one else bothered to pull. He walked the alleys behind the college, where heaps of discarded refuse piled against brick walls. One afternoon he discovered a burlap sack tucked behind a stack of crates. Thinking it was food waste, he nudged it with his boot. The bag twitched. Hardin jerked back, pulse hammering. Slowly, he untied the rope binding its mouth shut. Inside lay the desiccated remains of a small monkey, its eyes missing, its limbs bent unnaturally, a thin line stitched from its jaw to its ear. Hardin gagged as the odor of rot and chemicals filled the air. When he reported the incident to a city officer, the man waved him off. Students dispose of specimens all the time, the officer said. Better a monkey corpse than human waste. That's precisely what I'm afraid of, Hardin replied. The officer's expression hardened. Be careful, Mr. Hardin. Some stories ain't worth the trouble. But Hardin was already in too deep. The college itself seemed to pulse with secrecy. The faculty carried themselves differently in those days, more curt, more pale, as if their nights stretched longer than their days. Assistants hauled crates into the basement entrance under heavy canvas tarps. And Turner, always distant, grew visibly frayed, his hair unkempt, his movements sharper and less controlled. One afternoon, a cleaning woman named Ada stumbled upon Turner in the corridor outside the restricted wing. His coat sleeve was rolled to the elbow, his arm streaked with something dark. She froze mid-step. Turner looked up at her, his eyes raw and bloodshot. You did not see me, he murmured. Ada swallowed hard. No, sir. Good, he said. Some truths blind those who witness them. He stepped past her, and she heard the faint clicking of instruments inside his pockets, like teeth tapping. After that, Ada refused to work the night shift. Back at the Radcliffe plantation, Mariah began waking at strange hours. Each time she jolted upright, she heard a distant, rhythmic pounding, like a hammer striking metal far away. Sometimes it came from the direction of the fields, other times from the woods. Once, she could have sworn it echoed faintly from the river. Ruth tried to soothe her. Dreams can trick you, she whispered, smoothing Mariah's hair. But Mariah shook her head. This ain't dreams. Something's calling. Calling who? Me, Mariah whispered. The next morning she found a small cut behind her right ear, thin and straight, as though made by a scalpel. The skin wasn't torn. It was precise, surgical. When she showed her mother, Ruth's face went pale. "Don't tell nobody," she said. "Don't let them think you different." But Mariah was beginning to feel different. She sensed things before they happened. She felt prickles of warning in places she'd never feared before. And each night she heard whispers in a voice she didn't recognize. A voice that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Meanwhile, Turner's experiments escalated. Students reported that he'd stopped teaching altogether. His laboratory door remained locked at all hours, faint light pulsing beneath the threshold. Some nights, the buildings shuddered as if something inside thrashed violently against the walls. Brother Thaddeus saw the signs too, the unnatural quiet of the marshes, the strange discoloration on leaves near the old road, the candle that extinguished by itself whenever he prayed for the city. One night, after hearing the screams again, Thaddeus whispered into the dark, "Show me what walks here." The wind answered with a sound like shivering metal. By this point, Savannah could feel the tension, even if most pretended nothing was wrong. The air grew heavy. Storms came without rain. Dogs refused to enter the streets near the college. And behind the plantations, the forests seemed to lean closer, as if listening. Something was coming. Something no one yet understood. Something already circling the lives of Turner, Hardin, Mariah, Radcliffe, and Thaddeus like a tightening. Fear does not descend upon a place all at once. It spreads like humidity, slowly thickening the air until breathing feels like a labor. By midsummer, Savannah's whispers had swelled into rumors, and rumors into quiet dread. People who once dismissed the nightly cries near the medical college now walked the long way home, skirting the brick building as if it exhaled something foul. The boarded windows, once ignored, felt like eyelids nailed shut. No one said it above a whisper, but the city felt watched. The first real escalation came on a Sunday morning. Church bells rang across the squares, summoning families in clean linen and polished boots. The congregation of St. John's spilled into the sunlit street afterward, chatting in clusters. But a commotion stirred near the far edge of the courtyard. A fisherman, breathless and drenched in river water, staggered toward the crowd. In the basin, down by the tide gate. "There's something wrong," he gasped. People pressed around him, a nervous ripple of curiosity. "What did you see?" asked a man in a brown waistcoat. The fisherman rubbed his hands over his face, as though trying to erase the memory. "A carcass," he said, "but not a normal one." Someone scoffed. "You found a dead animal, that's all?" The fisherman shook his head violently. It had a human hand, a child's hand." The courtyard fell silent except for the distant caw of a crow. A woman murmured, "Lord, have mercy." The fisherman continued, voice trembling. "It was small, maybe the size of a boy, but the rest of it, the spine bent wrong, like it had been twisted. And the eyes—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "The eyes were sewn shut." A few men exchanged glances, muttering that he was drunk or sunstruck. But others, the ones who lived close to the river, looked terrified. The tides had been behaving strangely for weeks, pulling in debris from the marshes that didn't belong there, scraps of cloth stiffened with some thick substance, splintered wooden slats with rusted nails, and once, a small iron shackle that no one recognized. That afternoon, Elias Hardin visited the tide gate. He found the site already disturbed. Someone had dragged deep grooves in the mud, as if attempting to haul something heavy back into the water. All that remained was a thin line of blood, diluted by the tide but unmistakable. Hardin crouched beside it, touching the mud with unsteady fingers. "This is no animal," he whispered. A voice behind him said, You shouldn't be here. Brother Thaddeus stood at the top of the embankment, his worn coat fluttering in the river breeze. Hardin rose to his feet. Did you see it? Thaddeus nodded grimly. Briefly. And I prayed the river would take it before others could. Why? Hardin demanded. The city deserves to know. Thaddeus stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because whatever that thing was, it weren't born. It was made. Hardin's stomach lurched. By Turner. Thaddeus didn't answer. Silence was confirmation enough. Across the river, on the Radcliffe plantation, disturbances were escalating as well. One night, Mariah jolted awake to a faint scraping outside her cabin window. Something brushed against the wooden frame. Slow, deliberate. She held her breath, inching closer. At first she thought it was branches swaying in the wind. Then she heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. She whispered, Mama? Ruth stirred in the cot beside her. What is it? Listen. Ruth held still. The tapping continued, growing more insistent. Mariah's pulse roared in her ears. Ruth rose, lit a candle, and moved toward the window. Stay back, she murmured. Mariah clutched her blanket. Ruth lifted the curtain. She froze. Who is it, Mama? Mariah whispered. Ruth didn't answer. Her breath hitched sharply, and she slammed the curtain shut. Mama! Ruth grabbed her shoulders. You do not go near that window again, ever. You hear me? Mariah's voice cracked. What did you see? Ruth's hands trembled. It weren't a person. The next morning, the earth beneath the window showed 3 marks. Long, thin scratches in the dirt, each about the length of a finger, spaced evenly apart, as if made by something with unnatural precision. That same week, a plantation boy named Jeremiah collapsed while tending the mule stables. He shook uncontrollably on the floor, eyes rolled back, whispering nonsense through froth at his lips. Between spasms, he gasped out a single phrase. The girl is calling. The overseer dismissed it as heat stroke, but the adults in the quarters exchanged glances of pure fear. Mariah overheard them that night. One elder whispered, They say the doctor took 2 boys already. Maybe he wants more. Another said, No, this is something else. Something he woke up. Mariah curled into her mother's side, trembling. Meanwhile, inside the medical college, the faculty could no longer hide their unease. Strange odors seeped from Turner's laboratory, sharp metallic fumes mixed with something putrid, like decomposing fruit. Assistants quit mid-shift, citing headaches, fainting spells, and nightmares after hearing noises beneath the floorboards. A janitor named Clarence confided in Hardin one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. I heard chains, sir, Clarence said. Dragging, but slow, like whatever's down there can't walk right no more. Hardin felt a cold burn in his chest. Did you see Turner? Clarence nodded. Came out the basement door 2 nights ago. His clothes were soaked, and he talked to himself, saying not enough. Fear isn't enough. Hardin scribbled notes. Fear of what? Clarence shook his head. I ain't waiting to find out. I quit. This city ain't right. Inside Turner's mind, the descent had already begun. He stopped attending faculty meetings. He slept in the laboratory, pacing the floors until dawn. He tore pages from old anatomy texts, scribbling furious calculations over the margins. Students passing by at night heard him speaking, not to himself, but as though answering something they could not hear. One night, a student named Philip Carter peered through a crack in the door and saw Turner hunched over a table. A small, shivering creature lay strapped to the wood. Philip couldn't tell if it was an animal or a child. Turner whispered, Show me what you took from her. Philip stumbled backward, choking back a cry. The next morning, He withdrew from the college and left the city on the first available steamboat. But the most chilling escalation occurred on the Radcliffe plantation. One humid evening, Radcliffe hosted a gathering of influential men, local politicians, plantation owners, and faculty members from the college. They drank brandy in the parlor while servants tended the hallways. Mariah moved among them, carrying trays of glasses. She kept her eyes down, but she could feel Turner watching her from across the room. His gaze followed her like a shadow. During the fourth round of drinks, Radcliffe leaned toward Turner, chuckling. "I hear your work is progressing." Turner's voice was sharper than usual. "Progress requires raw material, Charles. The right kind. You ensured we'd have enough." Mariah stiffened. Radcliffe waved a dismissive hand. "A few unproductive boys won't be missed." Turner glanced at Mariah again. "Not them, her." A cold tremor crept through her spine. Radcliffe's brows furrowed. "What about her?" Turner lowered his voice. "The girl hears what others cannot. She reacts before stimulus. She dreams. With accuracy." Radcliffe laughed incredulously. "She's a servant, Aldric, not an oracle." Turner's pupils dilated. Some minds are born open. Mariah didn't understand the words, but she understood the hunger in his tone. Later that night, as the men dispersed into the warm darkness, Turner slipped out a side door. Mariah watched from behind the kitchen shutters as his figure drifted toward the edge of the property, toward the woods. She felt drawn after him, though terror clawed at her ribs. Her feet moved without permission. She stopped at the tree line. Ahead, Turner stood perfectly still, facing the darkness. It was as though he were waiting for something to emerge. And then, from somewhere deep in the forest, came an answering rustle, slow, dragging, accompanied by a faint wet breath. Turner whispered, "Come." Mariah clapped a hand over her mouth, stumbling backward. A twig snapped under her heel. Turner's head snapped toward her. But before he could approach, a horse whinnied loudly in the nearby pasture. The sound shattered the moment. Whatever lurked in the woods slipped back into silence. Mariah fled to the quarters breathless. Meanwhile, Hardin was piecing together a map of disappearances. He spread documents across his office floor, newspaper clippings, missing servant reports, notes from his interviews. The dates formed a pattern. Every disappearance aligned with a moonless night. Every moonless night aligned with shipments arriving at the medical college. Brother Thaddeus visited him again. "You're seeing it now," Thaddeus murmured. Hardin nodded. "He's taking people." "Not taking," the preacher corrected softly. "Transforming." "Into what?" Hardin demanded. Thaddeus stared at the floorboards as though something moved beneath them, into something that obeys him, or something he obeys. Hardin felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean?" But Thaddeus simply said, "The marsh speaks, and the marsh is afraid." The final spark that ignited full suspicion came 2 days later. A storm rolled over Savannah, swelling the river and flooding the streets. Lightning cracked open the sky. In the chaos, a servant from the Radcliffe plantation, an older man named Eli, appeared at Hardin's office, rain streaming off his coat. "You must come," Eli said urgently. Hardin grabbed his satchel. "What happened?" "The girl," Eli said. "Mariah. She's gone." Hardin's breath caught. "Gone? When?" "Just before the storm broke. Ruth found the back door open. The tracks lead toward the old carriage path. That's where the doctor rides." Hardin snatched his coat. "Show me." They raced through the rain, the wind howling like some grieving animal. The path was slick with mud, but the footprints were clear, Small, frantic steps leading away from the quarters, and a second set beside them, larger, deeper, uneven, as though the walker dragged one leg. Hardin knelt to examine them. Eli clasped his arms around himself. We didn't hear nothing, just a scream, faint, like it came from inside a well. Hardin rose slowly. We have to go to the college. No, Eli whispered. We can't go near there. Hardin grabbed his arm. If Turner took her, that's where she'll be. The wind roared, bending the trees overhead. Eli stared at the distant shape of the medical college, its silhouette flickering with lightning. If we go, he whispered, we best not go alone. Hardin nodded grimly. Then we find Thaddeus. When they reached the small chapel by the marsh road, Thaddeus stood waiting at the door as though expecting them. I felt the shift, he said. The land remembers her, and it remembers what took her. Rain hammered the roof as the three men stepped inside. Thaddeus placed a trembling hand on the pulpit. Tonight the doctor will finish what he started. Hardin's voice cracked with desperation. Then we have to stop him. Thaddeus shook his head slowly. It ain't him we're fighting. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the preacher's hollow eyes. What do you think? Guilty souls cursed by God or victims of madness? Hardin whispered. What do you think took her? Thaddeus answered in a voice barely above breath. Something he made, something that remembers what it once was. Outside, in the storm-black night, the medical college glowed with a sickly yellow light. And somewhere inside, Mariah screamed. The rain had become a curtain, thick and slanting, turning Savannah's streets into dark veins of rushing water. The lamps flickered in the storm wind, their flames bending low as if frightened to stand upright. Hardin, Eli, and Brother Thaddeus pushed against the gusts as they made their way toward the medical college. Each step splashed through rising puddles. Each gust rattled the trees so violently that branches cracked and fell around them. The building loomed ahead, a hulking silhouette with boarded windows and a steeple-like roof that cut the sky like a blade. Yellow light pulsed beneath the doors, too bright and too steady to be candle flame. It looked instead like the glow of a furnace. Hardin stopped a few feet from the entrance, gasping for breath. We need to move carefully. Turner could have men inside. Thaddeus wiped rain from his brow. No, he works alone tonight. How do you know? Hardin asked. Because the earth is holding its breath. No other footsteps disturb it. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the courtyard. Eli made the sign of the cross. Hardin stepped forward and pressed his ear to the door. He heard a sound, faint, muffled, rhythmic. Drip, drip, drip. Something fluid, falling steadily. Thaddeus placed a hand on Hardin's shoulder. Prepare yourself. Whatever you find in there, it will not resemble the world you know. Hardin swallowed and pushed the door open. It creaked slowly, the wood swollen from the storm. A wave of warm, metallic air struck them, thick with a smell of blood, disinfectant, and something else, a sweet, rotting odor beneath it all, like bruised fruit decomposing in heat. The front hall was empty. Shadows shifted along the tiled floor as the light from deeper inside flickered. Hardin stepped inside first, gripping his satchel as though it were a shield. Mariah, he whispered. Mariah, if you can hear me. A faint moan reached them from the far end of the corridor. Eli gasped. That's her! They hurried toward the sound. As they passed the anatomy theater, Hardin paused. The door stood slightly ajar. Inside, the rows of wooden benches were empty, but the dissecting table was not. A figure lay stretched across it, covered by a sheet. The fabric rose and fell shallowly. Hardin stepped closer and slowly lifted the sheet. A monkey stared back at him. or what had once been a monkey. Its skull had been partially opened and crudely stitched shut. Tubes ran from its nostrils. Its eyes twitched under half-closed lids. The creature whimpered softly, not with animal panic, but with something eerily human in its tone. Hardin dropped the sheet. "God forgive us," Thaddeus murmured. "This is only the beginning." They continued deeper into the building, guided now by the sounds of low, labored breathing, and sometimes soft, sibilant murmurs, as though something whispered into the walls. At the end of the hall, a set of iron stairs led downward into the basement. A cold draft drifted up from below, carrying the unmistakable smell of decay. Eli hesitated at the threshold. "This is where he brought her. I know it." Hardin descended first, lantern in hand. As he reached the bottom, the light revealed a narrow corridor lined with thick wooden doors, each one reinforced with iron bars. The claw marks on the doors were not from fingernails, but from something sharper. The gouges were deep, almost chiseled. Hardin's heart pounded. This is a holding place. For what he captured, Thaddeus said, voice hollow. For what he made, Hardin corrected. They reached the last door. It was slightly open. From inside came a soft, ragged cry. "Mariah," Hardin called. The cry sharpened into a whimper. Eli shoved the door open. Mariah sat curled in the far corner, her dress torn, her hair plastered to her face with sweat. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, darting between the men as though she struggled to determine whether they were real. "Mariah!" Eli rushed in, kneeling beside her. "We got you, child. We here now." Hardin stepped closer. "Are you hurt?" Mariah's lips trembled. He said he needed to know what I hear." Thaddeus knelt beside her. "What did he do to you?" Mariah lifted a shaking hand toward her right ear. A thin line of dried blood stretched behind it, the same precise surgical cut she discovered the week before, only deeper now, swollen and raw. "He opened something," she whispered. "He said my mind was listening to something older than me, something older than all of us." Hardin's breath caught. "Where is Turner now?" Mariah's gaze shifted toward the far wall. "He's below." Thaddeus frowned. "Below. This is the basement." Mariah shook her head. "There's another room beneath the earth. It's where he keeps—" A sudden metallic crash reverberated through the corridor. All three adults spun around. Eli's grip tightened on Mariah. "We need to go, now!" But Hardin raised a hand. "Wait, if something's loose." The lights flickered. A deep, throaty growl echoed from the darkness beyond the stairs. Thaddeus whispered, "It's awake." "What's awake?" Hardin hissed. Mariah's voice was barely audible. "The one he made from the others." The growl grew louder. Hardin lifted the lantern just as a shadow stretched across the far wall, distorted, hunched, and trembling. Then something slammed into the corridor wall with such force that dust rained from the ceiling. A hand, or something like a hand, grasped the door frame at the top of the stairs. Long, thin fingers curled around the wood, each tipped with a sharp, metal-hard point. Eli screamed, "Lord, protect us!" The creature descended slowly, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet tugged by invisible strings. As the lantern light struck it, Hardin staggered backward. It had once been human, or partly human. Its limbs were disproportionate, its joints bent at angles no body should allow. Patches of fur clung to its shoulders and spine. Its face was a grotesque merging of forms, eyes sewn at the corners to widen them, jaw extended slightly, as if altered to mimic another species. A crude, stitched scar ran from temple to jawline on one side, and its left hand, the one dragging along the wall, had been replaced entirely. 5 thin rods of polished metal protruded from the wrist, each functioning as a finger, clicking on the stone floor with every step. Mariah whimpered, "That's not a creature, that's a voice. He said it spoke to him. He said it told him what comes next." Hardin felt bile rise in his throat. He fused them, the missing boys, the monkeys, everything he experimented on. The creature opened its mouth. A wet, low gurgle escaped, followed by a whispered imitation of a word. "Rune." Thaddeus grabbed Hardin's arm. "It's warning us." No, Hardin realized in horror. It wasn't warning. It was repeating something it had once heard. It lunged. Eli shoved Mariah behind him as Hardin swung the lantern. The creature slammed into Eli with a sickening crack, hurling him against the wall. Mariah screamed. Thaddeus shouted, "Go! Take her!" Hardin pulled Mariah upright and dragged her down the corridor. Behind them, metal fingers scraped stone faster and faster. As they reached the stairs, a voice echoed through the building, a calm, unmistakable voice that froze Hardin mid-step. "A curious outcome, isn't it?" Turner. He stood at the top of the stairs, illuminated by the flickering yellow glow. His coat was soaked, his hair disheveled, but his eyes were electric with feverish triumph. "You shouldn't be here," Turner said, descending slowly. "Not yet." Hardin positioned himself between Turner and Mariah. "What have you done?" Turner's smile widened. "I have opened the threshold. I have touched the barrier between man and instinct, between soul and body." He gestured toward the creature emerging behind them. "That is proof of concept. Fear separated from shame, instinct separated from hesitation. A mind unburdened by identity. That's not a mind," Hardin spat. "That's torture wearing a body." Turner's eyes flared. "It's progress." The creature dragged itself closer, torn between obeying Turner and reaching the fleeing pair. Mariah clutched Hardin's coat. "He wants me next." Turner raised a scalpel glinting in the lantern light. "You were born listening, Mariah. Born open. You hear what the rest of us have forgotten. And I must understand what speaks through you." He stepped forward. Thaddeus, limping from a blow he'd taken earlier, staggered into the stairwell to block him. "You touch that child, and I swear—" Turner swung the scalpel downward. Thaddeus caught his wrist. But Turner was not weak. The two men struggled violently, grunting, slipping on the wet tiles. The lantern light cast frantic shadows as the creature reached the bottom of the stairs and shrieked. Hardin pushed Mariah up the stairs. "Go! Run!" Turner broke free from Thaddeus and lunged after them. But before he reached Hardin, the creature, drawn by its own fractured instinct, clawed its way toward Turner. Turner whirled on it. "No, stay back, obey." But the creature did not obey. It remembered. It remembered a needle, a scream, its mother's voice. It remembered Turner. With a ragged howl, it lunged at him. Turner stumbled backward, crashing into a table stacked with instruments. Metal clattered to the floor. The creature pinned him, its metal claws slicing across his chest. Turner screamed, not with fear, but fury. "You are mine," he shouted. "You are my design." The creature's jaws opened. "Stoop," it hissed, another echo from a memory Turner never imagined it kept. Then it tore into him. Hardin shielded Mariah's eyes as Turner's screams became wet, choking gurgles. Thaddeus limped up the stairs, pulling Hardin along. "We must leave," Thaddeus gasped. "The building won't hold." As they reached the main hall, the ground shook. A burst of heat surged from the basement. Hardin looked back to see flames beginning to lick through the cracks in the floor. The creature must have knocked over oil lamps during the struggle. Eli stumbled into view, clutching his side. "She safe?" "She's safe," Hardin said. "Come, quickly." They burst through the front door into the storm, as smoke roiled out behind them. The medical college shuddered as the fire spread. Within minutes, flames devoured the boarded windows, consuming the structure from the inside. Thunder cracked overhead. The fire glowed orange through the rain, a burning beacon of everything Turner had created, everything he'd destroyed. Mariah clung to Hardin as the building collapsed inward, sparks flying into the night sky. Thaddeus stared into the flames, whispering a prayer. Whatever Turner awakened will not vanish with him. Hardin nodded, breath trembling. No, but at least she's free. Mariah looked up at him, eyes wide with a knowledge no child should carry. He said something, she whispered, before he took me below. What? Hardin asked gently. He said the voices don't stop in death. He said they only grow louder. The last tower of the college crumbled into the fire. And through the roar of the flames, drifting faintly on the storm wind, came a soft, almost unnoticeable whisper. A whisper calling her name. If you stood in that room, would you call it crime or sacrifice? Leave your answer. The fire that swallowed the medical college did not die quietly. It burned through dawn, a red wound on Savannah's skyline, its smoke curling above the city like a morning veil. Even the storm could not quench it. Rain hissed against the flames, steam rising in ghostly coils as if the building exhaled its final breath. By mid-morning, a crowd had gathered. Students, merchants, servants, even a few plantation owners who feigned surprise though their eyes betrayed something else. Fear of what might surface now that the walls were gone. Some whispered that lightning had struck the roof. Others claimed Turner had accidentally ignited volatile chemicals. But rumors spread faster than any official explanation. And in those rumors lived the truth the city would dare not print. Hardin stood among the onlookers, coat soaked, shirt streaked with soot. Mariah sat beside him on the steps of the old apothecary, wrapped in a blanket Eli had found. Her face was pale, her eyes unfocused, not with shock, but with the weight of something deeper, something she could still hear. She flinched whenever a timber cracked inside the smoldering ruins. Thaddeus arrived just after sunrise. His limp had worsened, but his gaze was sharp as he surveyed the destruction. Will they ask questions? Hardin murmured. They'll ask the wrong ones, Thaddeus said. They'll ask what burned, not who burned with it. Hardin glanced at the ashes. Turner is dead. Thaddeus shook his head slowly. His body may be, but his work, his legacy, will haunt this land long after we're gone. By noon, the sheriff and several city officials convened to form a quick investigation. Hardin watched them sift charred rubble, pointing at melted instruments, scorched chains, twisted metal rods, the remnants of Turner's inventions. A deputy lifted what looked like a surgical frame. His hands shook as he set it back down. No bodies were recovered. Not Turner's, not the creatures, not the missing boys. The officials insisted the fire must have been too hot, the collapse too swift. Nothing could have survived, one declared, wiping sweat from his brow. Nothing could have remained. But Hardin noticed the way he avoided looking at the basement entrance, where the stone had cracked outward, as if something had forced its way out, not been buried within. The Savannah Evening Chronicle published a modest article the next morning. Laboratory accident claims life of renowned physician. Investigation ongoing. That was all. No mention of disappearances. No mention of rumors. No mention of screams. History, as it often did, folded its hands neatly and looked away. But the plantations did not forget. Within days, word spread among the enslaved communities. The night air felt lighter. The forest no longer whispered warnings. The river flowed smoothly again, no longer carrying strange objects to shore. Yet a different kind of fear blossomed. one rooted not in superstition, but in understanding. They had always known men in power could do terrible things, but now they understood something more. Those same men could hide their sins behind science, and the world would applaud them for it. Ruth stayed close to Mariah in the weeks that followed. She slept with her arm around her daughter, humming soft hymns into the night. But sometimes Mariah woke gasping, clutching her ears, saying she heard voices bubbling beneath the marsh water, voices she recognized. The boys, the monkeys, others she could not name. Eli visited often, carrying food, stories, and distractions, yet even he looked unsettled whenever Mariah tilted her head suddenly, listening to something only she could perceive. "Does she ever rest?" he asked Ruth quietly. "She rests," Ruth answered. "But peace is something different." Hardin knew the city would resist any formal inquiry. Turner had been too important, too admired. Wealthy patrons would not permit scandal. Families associated with his work threatened legal action if their names appeared in print. Hardin found himself alone in his desire to expose the truth. Alone, except for Thaddeus. They met one evening in the preacher's small chapel, lit only by a single lantern. "You could publish everything," Thaddeus said. "Tell the world what Turner did. Tell them what crawled in that basement." Hardin shook his head. "They'd call me mad, or a liar, or worse. They'd say the missing boys brought it on themselves." Thaddeus folded his hands. "Then why did the Lord show it to you? Why were you brought into this suffering?" Hardin stared at the lantern. "To save her," he whispered. "To save Mariah." Thaddeus nodded, but his eyes were troubled. "And what if saving her is not the end? What if something still follows her? What if the voice that Turner sought is still speaking?" Hardin hesitated. "You think it will come back?" Thaddeus blew out a long breath. "Some wounds reopen when the world grows quiet. Some spirits return when the land remembers their suffering." The preacher wasn't wrong. By late summer, stories crept through Savannah once again. A fisherman claimed he saw movement under the tide gate. Something pale, hunched, and fast. A farmhand swore he heard metal clicking in the woods at dusk. A child selling oysters reported a tall figure watching him from across the river, though when he blinked, it was gone. Most dismissed these tales as lingering fear from the fire. But Hardin knew better. So did Thaddeus. And so did Mariah. One dusk, as she walked near the edge of the fields, she paused, staring toward the city. Her mother called her name twice before she blinked and answered. "What is it, child?" Ruth asked. Mariah swallowed. "It's quieter," she said. "The voices ain't crying no more." "That's good," Ruth whispered. Mariah's brow furrowed. "But they're waiting." Ruth felt her heart tighten. Waiting for what? Mariah looked toward the river, where the water glimmered silver in the fading sun. "For someone to listen," she said. News traveled beyond Savannah, too. In Charleston, doctors whispered privately about Turner's disappearance, hinting at experiments too ambitious for their time. In Richmond, a professor lectured nervously about the dangers of tampering with consciousness. And in New York, an obscure scientific journal published a brief note suggesting that Turner's unpublished materials had been removed before the fire, by whom no one claimed to know. But Hardin suspected. The Radcliffe family left Savannah abruptly that autumn, selling their plantation to a northern investor. Their departure coincided with another rumor, that Radcliffe had been seen leaving Turner's laboratory days before the fire, carrying a locked trunk resembling the one Turner had brought to Savannah years earlier. No one knew what was inside. No one asked. Years later, people would recall Turner's story with a mix of fear and dismissiveness, calling it the old college haunting, or the doctor who went mad. But the families who had suffered, the ones who lost children, siblings, and neighbors, never forgot. Their memories became quiet inheritance, passed through whispered stories, warnings, and prayers. Savannah rebuilt. The medical college reopened in a new wing. The fire was chalked up to tragedy. But beneath the city, beneath the plantations, beneath the marsh, something remained unsettled. Something waiting, something listening. Years passed, but the ruins of Turner's laboratory left a stain that Savannah never managed to wash away. People forgot the details, but not the feeling, a coldness in the air when walking near the riverbanks, a hush that fell over the marsh when the wind shifted, a sense that something watched from the places where light struggled to reach. Even now, when locals pass the site where the old college once stood, they quicken their steps without knowing why. Maybe they're responding to memory, maybe instinct, or maybe to something older still, something Turner awoke and could never fully silence. The truth of what happened in that basement was buried by men of influence, but stories have a way of surviving beneath the floorboards of history. And sometimes, late at night, when the land grows quiet, people claim to hear faint tapping in the distance, a slow, metallic rhythm, as if calling to anyone willing to listen. So, what do you believe? Was this truth unveiled or buried to protect the powerful? Write your theory in the comments. And if you want us to keep digging into America's darkest history, like this video and subscribe for next week's story.